Okay, we'll go down the row and just introduce ourselves a little bit. Maybe we'll start with Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol, as she said. Yeah, I'm based in Calgary, and I'm the past president of the Writers Guild of Alberta. So if you have any questions about the Writers Guild, you can ask me. We're also having a coffee session with questions and answers and to tell you all the wonderful things about the Guild on Sunday at 10 a.m. I work right now in visual communications. I have a wide print company, and I'm also doing my MFA in fiction. And so this topic is near and dear to me. And so for a lot of my writing, I'm inspired from art and relationships. And just in the work world, having the tools to explain, pick up on the emotional indicators, other than somebody just saying, I'm angry, are useful.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Sandra, and I write primarily fantasy and some poetry. I've tried romance novellas, and I might try it again, but I'll have to get braver first. I love the idea of writing from the body, because as writers, we spend a lot of our times buried in our own heads, trying to figure out what these voices that most people would just call crazy, but we call characters, are actually trying to do. And to find a way to connect that to the reader, to other writers, even to ourselves at times. He thought, she said, she felt. Those come off as dry. If you come off with stomach clenched, fists tight because she's nervous and she hates speaking in public, people understand that, and it connects that viscerally to your audience, and it makes them turn the page.
And I'm Angela Ackerman. I'm the co-author of the Emotion Thesaurus, A Writer's Guide to Character Expression, so this is totally my jam. Becca and I, long time ago, we were writers, kind of a little bit green, thought we just needed a little bit of polish to get our work to where it needed to be. And we quickly realized just how much work we needed to do, and a lot of that work was on emotion, because we found that our characters were always doing the same thing over and over and over to express their emotions. And so that's one of the reasons why we built this book. We wanted a brainstorming tool for writers so that whatever emotion they were trying to express in their characters, they could really dig deep and, as Sandra said, pull real emotion from a place that the reader's going to connect to, because it's something that they've experienced themselves and they recognize it in the character. And that is really important for us to do as storytellers, is build that emotional connection so that readers feel like they're reading about real people just like them that have those same emotional feelings, and express it in ways that's really vivid, that you can feel.
Hi, everyone. I know some of the faces. I am Raina. I am a freelance editor, currently also doing my undergrad at the U of C in linguistics and Spanish. I've written a children's book as well, and I can attest to this amazing thesaurus because I often use it as a resource for the writers that I help.
Thank you.
It's amazing. Get it if you don't have it. I'm really excited to talk about emotion today. I think it's one thing that we struggle with sometimes as writers, a lot of times as writers. I think Sandra also mentioned a few of the sort of key words of, that should pop right out at you when you're writing. I felt, he thought, I heard, those kinds of things. If anybody was in Jonas Saul's class yesterday, the master class, yeah. So he talked a lot about these different words that should really just sort of spotlight in your writing. And you need to go back once you've got your first draft and start looking at how you can add in different types of emotions, different types of structures in order to make these connections, as everyone has noted. So I think we'll head back down to Carol. If you do you have some more points that you'd like to make? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I also have Angela's thesauruses, and I use them quite regularly. One of the things that I do when I start writing, I'm still discovering my process. And my process isn't the ideal of that I sit down and I start writing and all these beautiful words and sentences and story just flows magically. I'm more of a layerer. And so I may have an idea that I want to explore. I may have a what if and a why and something that I want to explore, and that could end up being in the story, or it could be something completely different. But just I start writing down, either I start with a sentence, a metaphor, a simile, just from some disconnected words. And I start writing, I start putting down a few pieces of dialogue. I may put down and say just angry. And I'll put a little TK. I don't know why I use TK. Maybe I saw it somewhere, but just something that I can search for that I know I need to add something more there. And then I come back and I look through like the emotion thesaurus and I go, what is my character feeling? Which one speaks strongly to me? And I look to see what are some of the physical reactions that the character has. What's going on internally? How does it escalate? And how do other people react to it? And so I can start feeding in some of that so that then the reader can empathize with the character and experience it themselves.
I want to bring out a little bit of my inner science nerd, so bear with me for a second. In Europe, a couple of years ago, they did an experiment with 1,000 people of ages from 25 to 80, I think was the cutoff on it, to ask them how emotions felt in the body. And the results were astonishing to me anyway. If you ask the 100 or so people here what disgusted feels like, 75% of them would say clenched stomach, throat closed like you're trying not to hurl. The physical sensations, 75% of the world put the same sensation with feelings. Angry, hot, head swollen, fist clenched. The sensations always match. So you can guarantee if you're writing, that if you're writing to what you feel that emotion looks like in your character, unless your character has some form of mental disability, PTSD, trauma, something that would alter how they show that emotion, 75% of your readers will see hands clenched, brows lowered, shoulders up. They will read what you're telling them. You don't have to tell them angry. They know what angry looks like. And this comes from a very instinctive part of the amygdala, the lizard brain. It's the fight and flight reflex. A little thought experiment. You're at home, it's 3 a.m, there's nobody else in the house. Outside, you're woken up by screaming, loud noises, and a huge bang. One of two reactions will happen. Half of your audience will read that, and they'll think, and I pulled the covers over my head and I didn't move until it stopped. Prey reaction, flight. The other half will think, oh my God, they're waking me up. And it will be, call the police, get out there, see what's going on. These are the things we connect to when we write from a more visceral, emotional place, instead of just connecting to things with our heads.
And that's a super good point. I think that we need to remember with our characters is that while the wonderful thing about showing emotion is that we all experience it. We all know what joy feels like. We all know what gratitude feels like. We know what fear feels like. Our characters are going to express those things depending on who they are, their personality, who they are deep down, their emotional range, what is a normal reaction for them. Like Sandra said, are they more geared towards flight or fight? And so getting to know your character really well is going to help you have a good platform for where you're going to go with your character's emotion and how you're going to express it. Because you could have something happen. Right now, we could have a spider that walks across this table And all of us may react completely different to that stimulus.
I'd be gone.
Right? Okay. I might be like, kind of flicking it off, and then keep talking, because for each one of us, there's going to be different extremes. There's going to be different things that make us feel a certain way. So getting inside our character's head and really understanding who they are, what they fear, what emotions they're sensitive to, depending on what your character happened to them in their past, they're going to be sensitive to very specific emotions, and they're going to maybe react more strongly to that emotion when it comes up than someone else. But the beauty is there's a lot of places that we can go when we're expressing emotion, but because it's a universal thing that we all share, our readers are going to be able to, if we write them clearly enough, they're going to be able to understand the emotion that we're conveying without having to say, I shuddered in fear, or I sighed with relief. If you guys write your emotion passages and you use the word actually when you're describing something, I want you to always mark that in your mind where you've done that, where if it's I've sighed with relief, and go back to that place, because that's almost always a point where you can work a little harder to show in a better way. Because if you have to actually use the emotional word, chances are you're not showing enough because you're actually telling it. You're leading the reader to say, I wasn't sighing because I was bored, I was sighing because I was relieved. And you shouldn't have to do that. If you're showing the scene evocatively enough, the reader is going to be there in the character seat, and they're going to feel that relief for themselves, and you won't need to actually use that word. So that's a little trick that you can use. Same thing with the word felt. That is one where if you have I felt, that's another place where you want to do a search for felt and try to challenge yourself to show that in a different way where you don't have to use that word. Because any of those words where I felt, I thought, I saw, they're distancing words. They create a layer of distance between the reader's experience and what the character is feeling. And so if you can get rid of those, not only will you achieve deep point of view if that's what you want to do, but whatever emotion you're trying to convey, it's going to be much more powerful because you don't have that filtering language, which kind of keeps them at a distance. I felt, it's cluing the reader in, I felt this thing. But if you leave felt out and you just simply describe what they're feeling, what they're going through, how their heart is pounding, or they can barely breathe, or they're rubbing their neck like crazy because their throat is closing up because the emotions are overwhelming them and they can't even speak properly, that's so much more powerful to read.
Great, yes. I think another one that's really good to keep in mind is was. He was angry, he was happy, he was sad. So be careful with that one as well. So how many people have heard of show, don't tell? Right? This is what we're talking about.
Pen.
Yeah, amazing. We all need that pen, right?
Yeah.
So this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Show, don't tell. Can you go ahead?
Sorry. In terms of describing character, it's very easy if it's your character's point of view, but how do you describe the other, if you're seeing through your character's point of view and you're describing someone else's emotion, can you be like, he was angry, because that's my interpretation of he was angry.
What does angry look like?
What does angry look like?
Right?
Saying, at what point are you giving too much interpretation of what your character's seeing?
Well, the thing to remember is whoever's point of view you're in, everything that they're seeing is filtered by their emotions. So what I mean by that is whatever they're focused on, whatever their mission is in the scene, whatever it is that they want to do, it's probably powered by a specific emotion. If they're scared and they're trying to run away from something, they're in a fear mode. And they're going to notice things that tie into that fear mode that normally they wouldn't focus on. And so if in that point of view they notice certain things, certain behaviors maybe that other characters are doing that seem a little bit threatening, that completely makes sense because they're going to be fixated on that. When you're experiencing a strong emotion like fear, so much it revolves around it, like your thoughts. Your thoughts are going to go to the worst case scenario. They're going to be very negative. Your thoughts are going to be very negative. And whatever the stimulus is that's making you scared, that is going to be the thing that you're focused on. So whatever emotion your character's in, it's directing what they see, what they interpret. And so when they're reading someone else's body language, that's what they're going to pick out is those type of details that they take as threatening, if that's the emotion that they're feeling.
Have you ever been in an altercation before where you thought someone was angry? Possibly, or sad, or any kind of emotion? Do you think, oh, Laura Jean, she looks pensive? Do you actually think that? No.
She does look
Her
pensive.
brow is furrowed. She's, making eye contact. She's nodding her head. These are all actions, right? And this is to show the reader
But at what point
that
do you
Laura
say
Jean.
Well, that's where you
Well,
have to decide
that's
on
style.
really strong, concrete ways to show that emotion versus trying to describe it in 10 different ways. You want to focus on the most powerful, whatever it is that you're going for. Some of it will be style, but some of it will depend on pacing and what the emotions are at work that you're trying to describe.
Mhm. Before we take your question, actually, I'm just going to turn it over to Alan because he hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. Just made it in. And I don't want to repeat anything that others have said, but I think a big part of it is, first of all, being sure that you've provided the context for the scene so that your reader will be able to infer what it is that the characters are feeling, what's being conveyed by the writer, so that you shouldn't have to say, sigh with relief, if the situation communicates a situation involving relief. And it's remarkable how small things can make a huge difference, like the eyes. If the eyes of a character can convey so much emotion, either from within or from without. For example, if you're confronting somebody and their eyes are wide open, you can pretty much tell what the emotion is going to be, especially given the context. It's going to be fear, it's going to be anger. Very seldom when somebody's angry do they really squint. And so...
trying to do that.
Sorry?
I'm trying to do that.
Really?
Do I squint when I'm angry? I don't think so.
No,
You're
you
right.
go,
Yeah.
like
I guess
that.
if you're glaring, then
It's a
you're kind
glare.
of, you
It's
kind of
a
got that.
glare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also the heart. Is it beating at a slow pace or is it racing? That conveys a lot. And once you've got that context nailed, once you know the situation and what the characters are likely to be feeling, or what you think the reader will infer from that situation, then trust your reader. And if you think you need to put with relief, you may be underestimating your reader's sensitivity, knowledge, understanding. And I've had cases where I've read a book and I said, why did you need to tell me that? I already knew that from what was happening.
And that's where critique partners are so valuable because they have the perspective that we don't have on our own work. So our critique partners, they can look at it and they can say, you know what, I'm really not quite clear what your character's experiencing here. Or they might say, I think maybe there's a little bit too much. Sorry, I can't read her name tag, but like you were saying, sometimes there's a little bit too much. So yeah, critique partners can be really great.
Should we head back down to Carol?
Sure.
There was a question here that we
Oh,
were
I'm
going back
sorry.
to.
Yes,
It
Kaylee,
was
go
just
ahead.
a comment. I was struck by the conversation that you were having with whoever's sitting there. that if you're writing in the body, the POV character has a wonderful opportunity to mistake body signals and create misdirection. And it struck me that would be a really good opportunity for plotting. And I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, and one thing that I wanted to share is, because as you go through the thesaurus and you see all of these wonderful words and things that you can use too many. And so sometimes it can be more powerful with what you don't say than what you do say. And I just took a small excerpt from a book that I'm currently rereading. It's from Jenny Offal's Department of Speculation. And it goes, I remember that day, how you took a $50 cab from work, how you held me in the doorway until I stopped shaking. We had told people. We had to untell them. You did it so I wouldn't have to speak. Later, you made me a dinner of all the things I hadn't been able to eat: cured meat, unpasteurized cheese, 2 bottles of wine, then finally, sleep.
Wow.
And so just in that, it's gut-wrenching.
And
Yeah,
you know
powerful.
what she's gone through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially if you've been through it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So I just wanted to share that because sometimes seeing examples helps to understand.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point, actually, Carol. And one that I wanted to make too is that how do we know when it's too much? Well, we do our research. And what is research for writers? Reading. So if you're not reading, you're not going to be able to figure out how much is too much or how little is too little, right? And I do have a couple of excerpts as well, if you guys will. This is one of my favorite books. It's called I Know This Much Is True by Wally Lamb. Her pale green eyes jerked repeatedly away from my face as she spoke. Thomas and I are identical twins, not fraternal. One fertilized egg that split in half and went off in 2 directions. Mrs. Fenwick couldn't look at me because she was looking at Thomas. So in terms of a writer who's maybe struggling a bit with emotion, that might come out as, she said, clearly uncomfortable, right? So if you're seeing sort of an adverb and this adjective, you want to give a little bit more depth to what is happening in the scene, as he has done here, right? He's explaining that they're twins, but he's going a little bit deeper to express that she's very uncomfortable looking at him, right? So maybe I'll pass it back to Sandra. Thank you.
One thing that I wanted to bring out, and it was exactly the way that Carol and we've all been mentioning, is that emotion and this kind of drilling into the character, motivation, emotion, thought processes, these are like the organs that pump the body of your character. They make it alive, they make it relatable, but they also make it slow down. It's not like the bones or the plot, it's not the muscles or the action scenes. So if you get too heavy with these, the plot section, the scene you're working on will slow to a crawl and your readers will just fall asleep on you. So what I've suggested, and what I try to do and do miserably at most points, is that for every time you drill into a character's emotion, ground them into their environment. Mention something they can see, mention something they can hear. Instead of just fists, muscles, blah, blah, blah. Can they punch a hole in a wall? Can they kick a table? Can you do something that brings the pace back up a little bit before you let them settle back down? Otherwise, you end up with whole sections of this lovely, beautiful, emotional prose that they're not going to read because it's between action A and action B.
Yeah, emotion definitely does need to work. Oh, sorry. Emotion definitely does need to work with the action. One thing that I would like to add, because we talked a little bit about expressions, is one thing that I often see writers do is when you're having a conversation with someone, like I'm doing right now, you tend to focus on someone else's face, right? That's what we do. But that, if we only concentrate on the face when we're writing to show different gestures and different micro expressions to show emotion, it really limits our ability to dig deeper and show the full range of ideas that we could go with to individualize emotional expression for each character. So one thing that I always recommend people try to do is to think down. And what can be really helpful is if you're wondering how your character would respond in a certain situation, or you're wondering, what are they feeling in this moment, try to think back to a point in time where you felt that same emotion. Because chances are there's a time where you did. And if you feel comfortable, allow yourself a bit of space to recreate that moment. If you did something, let's say, and you feel really guilty about it, you felt a lot of guilt, and your character, that's what they feel right now, go back to a time where you did something that you felt really guilty about, and just sort of allow yourself to re-experience that emotion And pay attention to what your body is doing, because often your body will react, especially if it's a strong emotion. And only do this if you're comfortable, because I realize some emotions, they can take us to dark places. So you do need to be careful a little bit. But this is a really good way to think about, what would my character do? And if you're really listening to your body, the different types of visceral sensations, especially things that are happening inside your body that you can't control, and the way your thought processes are running, that stuff, that depth, you can bring into your character, and maybe some of those ideas are things that you can explore for them in this situation. But as far as thinking down, the face is only this big, and you can only do so much with it. You can lift your eyebrows, close them, your eyes can be wide, you can smile, you can frown. There's all these different things that you can do with your expressions, and these are powerful and realistic, because like I said, in real life, we have conversations, we're looking at the person's face. But the reality is that the body is like this incredible landscape of ways to show emotion as well. And thoughts and visceral sensations and vocal cues, by the way. Vocal cues are also really powerful. The more emotion you feel, the less control you have over your voice. And it's going to get unsteady, your pitch is going to change, you're going to hesitate before you speak. There's all different things that you can do with vocal cues as well. So overall, with emotion, try not to stick to one area. So try not to just stick to body language, or just stick to thoughts, or just stick to visceral sensations. Use all the vehicles, all the different things that are at your disposal, and weave them all in. And then that way you're creating a really well-rounded experience for the reader as well.
Yeah, one thing that I was going to talk about, and I think that fits nicely with what you just said, is that too often authors provide us with dialogue that's nothing but a bunch of, or a couple of disembodied voices, that we just get line after line after line of dialogue with no action intervening or coming at the same time as something is said. And you can convey a heck of a lot by breaking up your dialogue with action, by breaking up your dialogue with a simple gesture. And if you just have, for example, the character pick up a pen and start tapping it on the table in the middle of saying something, that conveys a tenseness, a tension that you couldn't convey solely with the words, or you couldn't convey as well. And so work on your dialogue, and yes, make sure that your dialogue is varied enough so that the characters are not just conveying facts to each other, but that they're interspersing something that they want to say to the other character with something that reveals what's going on in the character's head. If a character is upset about something during the dialogue, he or she could just sit up more straight and just say, oh, that really hit me. I've got to respond to that. And I know that I heard somewhere along the way that if you need to use exclamation marks or other such forms of punctuation, that your words aren't conveying what you want them to. But I don't think that's the case. I think that you can use punctuation marks to great effect. And don't overdo the italics. But the occasional exclamation mark and the occasional other form or mark can really do a lot for you, I think.
That was actually something that Jonas Saul was talking about yesterday too, the exclamation marks. Doing quick checks through your manuscripts as well for things like that. So all of the words that we were talking about before, was, heard, felt, that sort of thing, but also exclamation marks. Where can you go back and add in maybe some actions to show these emotions instead? But always remember as well that you want to be forwarding your story, your plot line with these emotions. So if this dialogue and these emotions aren't taking the character anywhere, what is the point, right? So just be very careful and very aware that you're not, dragging out a scene with all of this different stuff. And it could just be that you're, practicing, because we do need to practice as well, right? Research and practice, that's how we get good. So read and write. and revise, of course. And I just wanted to go back to something that Angela had said about revisiting something in your mind if maybe you had felt that emotion before. If you're not comfortable doing it from your own point of view, do it from your characters. Close your eyes, pretend you're your character. Where are you? Set up the scene and feel what that character is feeling. Close your eyes and see what's happening in that character's head. And I think that'll give you sort of an intuition about, you know, how would you react? How would the other person react within that dialogue and with their emotions?
Can I add one thing on dialogue? I don't want to steal everything, but just one thing I wanted to say about dialogue to remember too is in tune with, you know, your character should, there should be a purpose for, you know, why they're saying what they're saying, emotions. They should be, I can't talk today. They should be pushing the story forward. We need to remember that in dialogue, your character always has a mission. They have a motivation. They have something that they're trying to find out in that conversation. It might be information that they need. It might be that they need help. There's something that they need in a conversation. And so often there's push and pull because your characters don't always have the same goals, whatever they want from that conversation. So that's where emotion can really come to play too, is when you have that push and pull between two characters who both want something out of the conversation, the other person's trying to hold it back, or, you know, there's lots of different places you can go with that. So just remember with your dialogue that it should never be like coffee talk. It should always have a purpose.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to just bring up was had this conversation with some writer friends, and just as we're talking about writing, and there was a case of there was that guy, and then there was that guy. And, you know, it becomes as you're talking, you can convey in your tone, in your actions, what you're meaning by that guy. Is it like the really cool writer who's advanced and or is it kind of the inappropriate person hitting on people just to kind of avoid if they're drinking? And so, you know, and it was as we're chatting about it, it's like, okay, if it's a conversation between people and somebody goes, that guy, what else are you going to put into the writing to convey whether it's that guy, you know, or that guy? You know, so, you know, and it's just it's something, you know, I challenge you all to think about as you go away and just, you know, think of just some simple words that can mean many things depending on the context, the situation, and the reaction, and how would you describe it differently? Because with the emotions and the physicality, some of those things are going to be how you're going to bring across what's really happening.
One thing I wanted to mention, and it's a slight twist on topic, is that there are certain times where showing isn't going to work. Say you're dealing with characters and you've got a young child of 2, 3, 4. They're not going to have the complex emotional range. And you've all dealt with kids. I know with my kids, you know, they don't get the cookie they want. The world is ending. The sky is falling. You may think an atomic color. Yes, it's not the right bear. It's a black and white bear, and I wanted the white and black bear. And then something distracts them. Their favorite show comes on television. You hand over the iPad, and the world is fine. Everything's over. So you have to realize that you're dealing with the backstory of your characters in how much and how often they express this emotion. Same thing if you're dealing with a character who is of a different generation or a different background. If I'm writing a character of my dad's generation, he's just passed his 90th birthday, if I want to start doing all kinds of emotional stuff, it ain't gonna work. He has 2 emotions, and that's asleep and angry. And he's from that kind of British middle-class working background. Angry is the only functional emotion he has. He feels all the other things. We all know it. It's just it never looks that way. And the same when you're dealing with people who have been through certain forms of trauma. If you're dealing with motorbike accidents, war, PTSD, anything like that. I'm right now working on a scene with my character, and a chapter ago, she was almost murdered by somebody she thought she trusted. The emotional responses I'm seeing from Sian now are, it's there, it's all there, but it's turned off. She cannot function in this place. So she has to say, I feel angry. There's no show of anger. There's no look. She can't, the body isn't functioning at this point. So just to be careful when you're dealing with your characters' backstories, when you're dealing with them, as we often do, taking them out and shooting them because it's Thursday.
I do that on Sundays.
Shooting. One thing to add with telling, though, is if you're in the character's point of view, there can be a temptation to use telling sometimes because it's easier. I was mad. That's so much easier than like really digging deep to what that looks like. But if you're in the character's point of view, you need to remember that with their thoughts, they need to be realistic. If we're thinking about something, if we're upset, if we're angry, do we ever think, I'm so mad? We don't think that. Instead, we're focused on the thing that's making us angry. And we might, in our head, kind of rant and think of different arguments that we could use. There's all different ways that we might show that we're angry in our mind, in our own point of view. But we're not actually going to use those words, I was so angry. So just be careful there that if you do use an emotion word, and I do agree that telling sometimes you do need to do so in certain situations, but just make sure that you can always justify it, that it does line up with how people really are.
And one thing you can do is have the character do something that's quote-unquote out of character. The character may see herself or himself in a certain way and be conveying that to the reader for parts of the story, but there may be something underlying that that's really bubbling under the surface, and then it comes out. And I know that Alice Munro will do this occasionally, where she will have a character who seems to be okay with what's happened, and then there'll be this outburst of anger. She'll smash something. The character will smash something, or just yell out of nowhere. And suddenly you realize, oh, that's what's been going on. Mm-hmm. And so anytime there's something that seems to be unusual, out of the blue, that can convey a lot more than hammering it home. And, you know, I was thinking, I teach science fiction, fantasy at York University. And I try to distinguish between the fantastic and the realist, but I make it a point of saying that realism, quote unquote, in fiction is also a convention. For example, in dialogue, people speak in reasonably complete sentences, and even though we use a lot, characters don't. But if they do, then you know something's going on. Throwing in something unusual like that, whether in terms of the conventions of fiction as a whole or in terms of the character's own behavior, can really convey a lot.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Along with what he was saying about don't underestimate your audience, but then also children. Like, at what point do you have to dumb stuff down for the readership, like young adult fiction versus adult fiction?
Oh, I don't
think
things
young
down.
adult
Not young
is-
adult, no.
No.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence that comes with growing up. So at what point do you...
I don't know that you dumb it down, but you may have to be a little bit more straightforward in your descriptions so that it's more obvious, it's less subtext.
It's not as subtle.
Give me an example of what that means to make it more straightforward.
You might be more literal, so you might show more obvious body language. So angry, shaking fists or something like that. That's concrete. A small child, they would know what that's like when they're shaking with anger. That's something that they can relate to and that they've probably done. Versus, some sort of alluding to anger because of, I don't know, something that they do that maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to think of
I
that.
have a good one.
Okay. I'm trying to think of something for that age
It's
group.
good. It's good. So this is, she was sad. She said sadly, unsurely, I was angry. This is what I've picked out for that. I found my mother sitting in the front parlor trying to hide her tears. The newly repaired photo album was in her lap. What's the matter? She shook her head, tapped her lip. I don't know, Dominic. You go ahead. It's just that with everything that's happening right now. You don't want a new kitchen, I asked. The question came out like a threat. So this is an adult novel, right? It's a bit more subtle than what you might find in YA. She's hiding her tears. It came out like a threat. But I think that it's going to be the same type of emotion that you're going to show, whether the character is written for YA or for adult.
And if that scene, if she were talking to a child in that scene, she might actually articulate what she's feeling by using an emotion term. She might say, well, you know, I'm a little bit sad because of X, Y, Z. In that case, it completely makes sense that she would say that, because she's trying to convey a complicated, like, she can't necessarily dig into the nuances of why she's sad. She does have to condense it a bit for that child to understand. So in cases like that, I think it would be totally fine to use something direct like that. Well, I'm a little bit sad because, you know, this happened. Or say it in a way that the child would understand. But yeah, for YA, I mean, they're pretty sophisticated. I don't think you need to dumb things down for YA readers.
I just want to go back to something that Carol and Alan mentioned, which is about anger, and that sort of being the easiest reaction. And I think that goes for a lot of different people, especially, you know, the generations that, as you said, Sandra, that's kind of the only emotion that they have, right? Anger or nothing, right? So, and showing that by a sudden action like a fist on the table or something like that can really convey more than just anger, because we know that that's sort of the go-to emotion for our human selves, right?
I think for some too, it's just to read like a writer, and as you're going through things, and to look to see when you're reading something, highlight, mark up the book. I know I should do it. I don't want to do it, but I know I should, because then when you go back to find things or to add sticky notes, but look at where in somebody's writing, it's really brought forward an emotion in you. Think of the books where you felt really, really happy, ecstatic. Think of books that have made you cry, you know, and part of it too is to look at with movies and TV and where you're feeling that emotion. How do they get that your heart rate just pumping as something's happening? You know, it's a lot of intense, quick action. So it's to look back at those moments and just analyze what's going on.
One thing I wanted to mention, because I really liked the point that Alan made about throwing in an emotional outburst, because it gives you, it lifts off the top and lets you see some layers underneath of your character, is that if you are going to do that and you want to make it work, make sure that at some point you've laid the breadcrumb trail for that to be there. You can't have somebody who's been placid and happy for 15 chapters all of a sudden pick something up and throw it through a wall. It's just not going to fly.
Yep, cause and effect. Should we open this up to questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, sorry.
Any thoughts on internal dialogue, strengths and pitfalls with dealing with emotions through internal dialogue?
Don't overdo it.
When your character's
But
thinking,
italics
they're
are
not-
good.
When they're thinking, they're not doing. And that's what you need to remember as far as pacing goes. You do need thoughts. Sometimes thoughts are great for context, to really like dig into why someone is reacting a certain way. Sometimes you do need to dip into their thoughts, and they can give context as to why are they really upset that Janice showed up, you know, like what's the history with Janice? And you have to be careful because you don't want to launch into an info dump, but you can deliver certain things through thoughts. But I think that it's really, like you say, you have to be careful. You don't want to use it a lot, because too much thoughts means your character's not actually acting and the story is not progressing. Sorry. You and then you.
This was just a really quick comment on something you said earlier that I thought was really important. The that guy thing.
Yeah.
Yes, you will.
I'm really enjoying and learning from S.A. Corey's Expanse series right now. And he's expert at this, talking, he doesn't say, the character felt this. What he says is, he said it like an old man whose bones held the blah, 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 blah,
Metaphors
blah.
and, yeah.
Yeah, he brings it out. And the other thing that maybe that made me think of S.A. Corey was, he'll have other characters comment on other people's emotions. He'll have other characters wonder what other people are thinking, or like there's a period where people are exchanging messages several times a day or leaving messages for one another, and you know that they miss one another because of these messages. So it doesn't always have to be in the body. Sometimes
Yeah,
it
it's
can be in the
subtext.
light.
Yeah.
So you made me think and then think some more. So.
Good.
So the gist of that, if you didn't get it, was use other alternative means as well, possibly messages or other characters to reflect what the emotions are.
Yep.
So speaking about the toddler who doesn't get the right cookie or the right bear, how do you distinguish the pain of that toddler from not getting the right bear versus having experienced abuse, like physical abuse or emotional abuse? If the emotion is the same, if the same is angry and hurt.
Well, that's where post-traumatic stress comes in and understanding what that looks like.
And developmental psychology, because a child doesn't necessarily have any other way to express themselves except for tantruming, right?
It's viewed as acting out, but there's whole psychology behind why they're doing that. It's they don't have the life experience that we have as adults. We've had vast experiences, and they don't. So how do they get that emotion out?
So the PTSD is after the fact. So during the time, it would just be the same emotion and then
You mean during the
Yeah,
event
during
that's
the
actually
event.
happening?
I would say that you need to do a little bit of research in developmental psychology, for sure. I think that children, they have certain ways of acting out, and of course it depends on the character, right, of the child. But for example, wetting the bed, or, but pooping their pants, or acting out in different ways, right?
Destroying things.
Drawing certain things, that sort of thing, because they don't have this emotional intelligence to be able to express what's happening to them, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, over here. I was just saying that a child is not going to, for that kind of thing, is not going to think there's something wrong with the adult. They're not going to be angry at the adult. They're going to think something's wrong with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the anger's
That they did something. Yeah, 100%. I don't know if this will help anyone, but I do have some cards here that show, give you some ideas on different ways you can show emotion beyond just the face. So different things like body posture, shielding motions, the way the body angles. So if anybody wants this little card, it can be a good reminder when you're trying to figure out how you want to show something. So I'll just leave those here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys.